New reporting from ProPublica and the Texas Tribune looks at how nepotism and conflicts of interest in private schools may lead to concerns about transparency and accountability as the state creates education savings accounts. Those accounts, which the legislature approved creating in the spring, will use taxpayer money to help families pay for private school tuition. And joining us now is Lexi Churchill with ProPublica. And Lexi, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you for having me.
Well, first off, talk to us about why you all wanted to compile this data and what you found.
Absolutely. So this investigation started back during the regular legislative session this spring. And we started looking at this because we noticed that lawmakers were not applying the same regulations as far as conflicts of interest and nepotism procurement rules go, which was creating this double standard essentially where they're allowing private schools that receive taxpayer dollars through these funds to do things with those funds that public and charter schools are not allowed to do. For example, hiring close relatives of the head of school or trustees and giving contracts to a board member. So the rules were so striking that we decided to take a deeper look at this to see if we could decipher, if private schools don't have to follow these rules, what does this typically look like? And so we essentially took the Private School Association's list of more than 1,000 accredited private schools across the state and looked at the top 200 with the highest enrollment. And from there, we found there are public tax filings for about 90 of those that are nonprofits that have to file these reports, which typically include some information about conflicts of interest or nepotism, whatever may have you. And from there, we consulted with education attorneys to see what of these disclosures would actually be allowed in public and charter schools versus what would not. So that's how we came to those final numbers.
Well, what sort of mechanisms are actually in place to catch conflicts of interest or issues with contracts in public schools?
There's an extensive amount of regulations for public and charter schools. There's still certainly some exemptions for both as well. But for instance, it's typically not allowed in charter and public schools to hire close relatives of either the superintendent or the school board members. Just this last session, lawmakers also tightened rules around contracts, which were previously allowed to be given out to sitting board members of charter and public schools, but now that is not allowed. So they made that change this past session, but did not apply that regulation to private schools, for example. So there's an extensive amount of rules that charter and public schools have to follow for procurement, conflicts of interest, and nepotism, with some exemptions, and none of those are applying to private schools in these cases.
Well, what can the state do to actually hold private schools accountable?
This is completely up to state lawmakers. They could have added these regulations if they had wanted to. Now all that's left to be seen really for at least this first round of the education savings account over the next 2 years is what the state comptroller, which is the agency in charge of implementing the program, will do during the rulemaking process that'll be rolled out over the next few months. They, in theory, could go a step further by requiring some of these similar conflict of interest and nepotism regulations for private schools that participate and are getting these taxpayer dollars in the program. But it was not clear from their response to us whether they will do that. They simply said that the rulemaking is still underway.
Definitely an interesting investigation. Lexi Churchill with ProPublica, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks so much for having me.